welcome you to this Bible study of the Banking Blessings Ministry. My name is Goodluck Ofebu, and this is my wife,
Obi Ofebu.
We welcome you to this Bible study in which we are going to look at an interaction between King of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, and the three Jewish people that came with Daniel, that was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that were administrators in the province of Babylon. At this time, King Nebuchadnezzar set up an image of gold, a statue, an enormous statue. They said it measured 9 feet wide by 90 feet high, so it was enormous. And then he published a decree that a musical prompt, at the sound of a musical prompt, everybody should fall down and worship this image. The Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, defied the king. We're sure Daniel also did, but this account is about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, this interaction between them is well known in the Bible, but it gives us information that helps us understand about two possible ways of motivating worship. One by force, which is what Nebuchadnezzar tried to do here, and the other one by choice, which we're going to look at in more detail. So the interaction between Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego on one side, and Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and his image of gold on the other side, provides us an opportunity to look at how we motivate ourselves to worship and what God created us to do in terms of motivating ourselves to worship Him. We will learn about two forms of motivation, essentially. One is coercion, which is trying to make people worship by force, by threat of harm, by threat of punishment, by intimidation, or by any kind of threat, which is exactly what Nebuchadnezzar did. But what Nebuchadnezzar did actually presents an extreme case of using force to compel worship. And that extreme case enables us to understand this and to contrast it with the way that God, the right to choose to worship that God has given us. God created us to worship Him, no doubt, but He gave us a right to choose, and of course gave an incentive for us to make that choice, because He said that if you worship Him, He will be your God. We're going to look at this in more detail. So we have two forms of motivation for worship. One is coercion, that is force, like Nebuchadnezzar did, and the other one is choice. Before we proceed, honey, do you want to make an opening statement on this?
Well, I'd like to welcome you, our listeners, and those joining us live and going to the website. We want to thank you for what you're doing and for the encouragement. It's interesting to me today that we're looking at the forms of worship or ways of worship. That's by my understanding, or what motivates people to worship. How are people motivated to worship? Worship is something that we look at and we see all around us. We think that we see all around us every day. But then, I think by looking at this topic today, we will actually understand whether what we're looking at and seem to think that we're doing, which we call worship, is actually what worship is. Because then you'll be able to look at worship. What is behind, what is my motivation for this worship? Your motive for the worship will help us understand whether what we're doing is worship or part of worship, or is it external signs of worship, and where is the worship starting. So it's going to be very interesting to look at this.
Okay. So we are going to learn, of course, that God created us to worship Him and gave us the right to choose. And that choice, that ability to make a choice to worship and the incentive to make that choice is described actually through God's covenant with Abraham. And we are going to look at the covenant, a covenant that covers Abraham's descendants and beneficiaries of Abraham's promise, the promise of God's promise to Abraham to send a Messiah for all mankind. Our study will be based on Daniel chapter 3, where we look at the interaction between King Nebuchadnezzar and Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. Then we will look at Genesis chapter 12 and 17, which give us information about God's covenant with Abraham, and we'll try to understand the basis for worship, for our choice to worship. And John chapter 1 helps us understand that the beneficiaries of Abraham's covenant, or rather that Abraham's covenant covers even people that are not descendants of Abraham by blood. And we will see the link, because Christ Himself made this clear to us, and it's well captured in the Gospel according to John. Well, King Nebuchadnezzar, as I said, set up an image, an enormous image of gold. The Bible describes this in detail. The description really is not important. It was something he set up that he wanted people to worship. And he wanted them to worship. He wanted to force them to worship. It's not a question of saying, okay, here is a God I have made, you can worship it. No. He said you have to worship it. There will be a musical prompt that will be sounded, and at the sound of that musical prompt, everybody must fall down and worship. And if you do not fall down and worship, then you will be picked up and thrown into a burning furnace. That's very clear there. Worship. If you don't worship, you will be killed. That's it. And before we proceed about this, let us read about it. It's in Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Then we are going to read verses 4 to 6, because that captures the information that helps us in our study.
Reading from the book of Daniel, chapter 3, the New King James Version, verse 4. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace."
Well, it's very clear here. It's using threat of severe punishment for non-compliance. Yeah. Here is something I have made that I want you to worship. If you don't worship it, this is what I'll do to you. I'll kill you. I'll pick you up. You will be picked up and thrown into a fiery furnace. So there is clear threat of severe punishment being used to compel people to worship an image of gold. Notice also that there is no offer of any kind of benefit or reward for worshiping. The reward, of course, is that you don't get killed. But there isn't anything that says, worship me and I'll do this for you. Instead, it says, worship me. If you don't worship, I'll kill you, I'll throw you into a furnace. And this is a clear example, an extreme case, but it's a clear example of trying to compel worship by coercion, trying to motivate worship by coercion. And this type of worship, this type of motivation for worship is not of God. God created us and gave us a choice, and we're going to look at that later. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said no, that they will not worship the image of God that Nebuchadnezzar had made. And this is what was happening in Babylon at that time. That remember that Daniel and his friends and a number of other people were taken from Judah and placed in the service of the king. They were trained for a period of time. We've gone through this in the past. But what has happened is that at the end of the training, they became so good. And since then, Daniel has had other interactions with the king, like he did a dream interpretation that wowed the king. And as a result, the king placed Daniel in a very high position in Babylon. And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were made provincial administrators. Well, this didn't go down well with the rest of the people of Babylon, especially the people that, the seers and the wise, so-called wise men and magicians, that the king depended on before for wisdom. And now with Daniel and his friend Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the king had found another source of wisdom, another group of people that he depended on. And in fact, he depended on them more. And this wasn't swallowed by the people, by these other, the other people that are now less powerful, if I may say that had less to offer the king. So there was often a conspiracy, and they used this king's decree to compel worship. They used it to conspire against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They went straight to the king and said, you remember those Jewish people you brought from Judah? Well, they are not obeying your decree. And remember, you said whoever doesn't will be thrown into a furnace. Well, these people are not obeying your decree. What are you going to do about it? Of course, the king was furious. He summoned them to his kingdom, to his palace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And there he gave them an opportunity. He said, look, I'm going to give you an opportunity to worship. The music will sound, and when it sounds, you fall down. If you fall down and worship, then there is no problem. But if you don't, then you are going to be thrown into a furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, no, king, you don't need to do that. We have no need to defend ourselves in this matter. We have made a choice. We worship God, and we are not going to worship your God. Now, let's see, am I jumping too far here? They told the king that they were not going to worship his God, they are not going to worship his image. Let us read about it before we talk about more. Daniel chapter 3 is in verses 8 to 18, but we will only read verses 14 to 18. Only if you want to say something before you read, that's fine, or at the end, it's always...
Yeah, we'll just continue. One thing I wanted to chip in here is the fact that, the worship of this Nebuchadnezzar's god of gold is very important to him. Because if you remember when he ransacked when he defeated the Jews, he packed all the vessels from this temple of God and put them in the temple of his own, the Babylonian god. And that was like saying every god must bow to this, his god, and everybody must bow to him. So we need to understand how it is important to him. and by extension, what worship actually means. It's total.
Yes.
Everything must bow down to this God. So let's continue to Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3, verse 14. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up."
Very clear. He said, we worship God, and he is able to deliver us from your furnace and from your hands. He is able. But even if he doesn't, the fact that we worship him is a choice we have made, and it's not dependent on any specific thing. It's not dependent on what he does in a specific situation. He can save us, but he will choose when and how to save us. If he doesn't save us, it does not affect our choice to worship him. It does not affect our refusal to worship your God and the image you have made. We have made a choice, and our choice is to worship God, and that choice is permanent. So they made it very clear that they worship God by their own choice, not by any force from anybody or King Nebuchadnezzar.
One thing that this particular place brings out is the fact that when we choose to worship God, it's not dependent on anything. It's a choice that shouldn't be bound or guided by, well, if God deliver, if they didn't say if God saves us, we will worship him. But if he assuming he doesn't save us from your hand, then we will now worship the gold image. But they said no. The God, they have faith. When you worship God, your faith is that high because you know that you have selflessly and fully surrendered to him. Therefore, he will deliver you. And they went ahead to say, even if he does not deliver us from your hands, we still will not worship the gold image. So it's not consequent upon anything. Their choice to worship God was total.
It's absolute.
It's absolute, and it was not dependent on anything.
Yes. Well, what is this choice to worship God? We worship. God created us to worship him as he discussed with Abraham. He made this covenant with Abraham where he said two things very clearly. He said, worship me and serve me. Worship and serve God. Then God will be your God. Worship me and serve me, and I will be your God. That is the covenant. Of course, part of that covenant was a symbol of the covenant was circumcision, but we are not going to go into circumcision because the statement of the covenant is very simple. If you worship me and serve me, I will be your God. You are a reward for worshiping me. You are a reward for compliance. Your reward for worshiping God is that God will be your God. it doesn't say you have to worship. Well, if you choose not to worship, then God will not be your God. But there is no coercion. There is nothing saying, hey, you have to do this, just like Nebuchadnezzar was trying to do. You have to do this. If you don't do it, here is your punishment. No. He said, I want you to worship me. And your reward for worshiping me is that I will be your God. Now, here it says what he wants, but it also makes it very clear that you have a choice. You worship and you get the benefit of worshiping, which is that God will be your God. But if you don't worship, nobody is forcing you. This is in Abraham, the covenant that God made with Abraham. And let us read about it in Genesis chapter 17, verses 1 through 7. Just a section. I think 1 through 7 captures the covenant quite well. Of course, from 8 onwards, it talks about the covenant of circumcision. But we are not going to read that. We will also read from chapter 15, Genesis chapter 15, which is really the beginning of God's promise to no, it's not the beginning. This is where God defined the reward for worshiping. He told Abraham, said, look, don't be afraid, because I will be your reward. That is, he, God, will be Abraham's reward for worshiping him. Okay, let us read the covenant of circumcision, the God's covenant with Abraham, Genesis chapter 17, verses 1 to 7.
Genesis chapter 17, reading again from the New King James Version. Chapter 1, verse 1. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am Almighty God. Walk before me and be blameless. And I will make my covenant between me and you, and will multiply you exceedingly. Then Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you in their generations, for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and your descendants after you.
To be God to you and your descendants after you. So if you go through this, what he really says is, right in verse 1, he said, I've forgotten the words he's used, but he said, walk before me
and be blameless.
And be blameless.
Yes.
So he said, worship me and serve me. And then in verse 7 here, he said that he will be your God and the God of your descendants. Worship me and serve me, you and your descendants, and I will be God to you and to your descendants. So Abraham God made this covenant with Abraham, telling Abraham and all children of Abraham, all descendants of Abraham, to worship him, and then offering a reward for worshiping him. In fact, in chapter 15, he talked about that reward, because the covenant really started with the promise in chapter 12. Then in chapter 15, he told Abraham, let's read that, he said,
Genesis 15, verse 1. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward.
So I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward. That is your reward for worshiping me, your reward for following what I have said, your reward for walking with me and staying blameless is that I will be God to you and your descendants. That is your reward for choosing to worship and serve God. The covenant is between Abraham, and Abraham made this on behalf of himself and his descendants. But there are other people that were covered in that covenant. If we look at the basic promise where God promised Abraham that he called Abraham to leave where he was and go to some other place, and then he told Abraham what he would do for him. And part of that was a promise to send the Messiah on behalf of all mankind, on behalf of, so that people of all the earth will benefit from Abraham's offspring. And because he will send the Messiah as a descendant of Abraham. He will send the Messiah through Abraham's offspring. And the whole world, all people on earth, will be beneficiaries of that promise. We'll find out let us read about this, the promise in Genesis 12 verse 3. And then in John chapter 1 verse 6, we'll find Christ himself actually made it very clear that all the beneficiaries of this promise can be children of God, that they are in fact beneficiaries of the covenant with Abraham, the covenant to worship God and become children of God. Let us read Genesis chapter 12 verse 3. Or do you want to step in at this point or after?
Let's go to Genesis.
Okay, Genesis 12 verse 3.
Genesis chapter 12 verse 3. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed.
Okay. In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. This was God's promise to send the Messiah through an offspring of Abraham, and to send the Messiah for all the earth, because he says all the families of the earth. So the beneficiaries of this promise are covered they are party to God's covenant with Abraham, which says, you worship me and I will be your God. So the beneficiaries of the Messiah promise, if they worship God, then God will be their God. Abraham, if worshiped God, so God was his God, and then all descendants of Abraham by biological descent, if they worship God, God will be their God. Then all other people, because they are beneficiaries of the Messiah promise, if they worship God, God will be their God. As I said, Christ explained this when he came, and it is well captured in the Gospel according to John, which we now read. John chapter 1.
John chapter 1 verse 12. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God.
So, all of those who believe that Jesus is the Messiah that was promised to Abraham in Genesis 12:3, and all of those who worship God according to the covenant that God made with Abraham, then they are given the right to become children of God. That is your reward for worshiping. You earn the right to become a child of God if you accept God's covenant with Abraham. And that is, accepting God's covenant with Abraham is you choose to worship and serve God. You don't have to be born into the family of Abraham. That's what John was, or what Christ was explaining here. He said, those who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. Because God sent him for all of us, if you accept him as the Messiah that was promised in that promise to Abraham, and you accept the covenant and do what the covenant says we should do, and we're going to look at this in a little more detail, the meaning of worship and the meaning of serving God. If you do that, then you earn the right to become a child of God. That is what God, essentially the same thing that God told Abraham. If you worship me, I will be your God.
Yeah, we see more what John is trying to tell us here about receiving the Messiah. That's receiving Christ, receiving Jesus as the Messiah, the anointed one that God has sent to redeem us. That's receiving him as the Messiah. And really, it points us to the fact that it's not something that is, don't expect, I have to be born of the flesh, I have to be biologically, born by this person, or is this something that somebody will come and, a man will come and confer on you? It is something that comes from God. Because once, something that is tied here is the moment you believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and he's the Son of God, and he's the Savior, okay? The moment you do that, it becomes something that is spiritual, something that comes from within you. Remember when one of the persons asked, was it Nicodemus, that said, how can a man enter back into his mother's womb and be born again? This is the being born again that he's talking about. Yeah. This is now being spiritually, you have a new birth. The Holy Spirit comes into you, you have a new birth, and then it gives you the advantage, and it confers on you to be the child of God. Now, why this is important and tied to worship is the fact that, it's not just something you do. Once you are born again, you begin to live. Yeah. You begin to live for that person. And that person here is God. Yeah. And when you begin to live for God, that is an act of worship.
Yes.
And that is what ties it to the kind of worship that God expects from Abraham. Yeah. Because remember, he said, if you would live faithfully for me and walk before me, if you will serve me faithfully and be blameless. Now, service, we'll see later how service and worship are intertwined. Yeah. So that's what really ties up this verse to us in worship. You can't really worship God unless you understand him in this particular context.
Yeah. Okay, so what does worshiping God really mean? The intention here is not to define, but rather to identify some of the aspects of the meaning that we have encountered through several Bible studies in the past. But to worship God, and of course the reward for worshiping God is that he will be your God. But to worship God includes you resign to the will of God in everything you do. And remember Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego in that interaction with Nebuchadnezzar. They said, God is able to save us from their furnace. But even if he does not, which means even if he chooses, even if his will is to do something different. It doesn't affect our worshiping Him. And you have to resign to this will. You have to recognize that He has a bigger view of your life than you do. So that at times the specific thing you are looking at may be different. So you have to be ready to accept and say, okay, God is going to do this for me, and He will do it in His way. And you be prepared to accept and to follow the way that He's going to do it. Now, commit to living in the image of God. We've talked about living in the image of God in several Bible studies, which really means that you represent God in every human interaction. That everything you do conveys God in some way. Everything you do makes people feel, draw closer. Make people want to seek. Make people to seek God, to seek to be like Him, to seek to do something that will bring them closer to God. So you have to essentially, each of us is God's ambassador to another person, God's representative to the next person. So you have to live in His image in order to represent Him in every human interaction. You have to be God's provider assistant. Always, when there is a need, God will place somebody in position to provide for that need, to help provide for that need. So you have to be willing and ready to provide, and also when you are beneficiary of a service provided by the other people, you have to accept it happily with appreciation. That is the role of God's provider assistant. Your actions and words radiate godliness. That is what you do brings people closer to God, or brings God closer to people, brings something about God to people, to let them know the life, that there is something about your life that reminds them of godliness, and the things you do makes people want to respond in a positive way. It elicits a positive response from people. And there is more. These are just, I'm picking from things we have studied in the past. What does it mean to worship God? But there is, I'm sure there is more and more that we cannot cover in one Bible study.
Yeah, of course, one thing we have to hold here is that once we have chosen to worship God, and really we worship God, His promise is that the reward will be Himself.
Yes.
The reward for worshiping God is God Himself.
Yes.
Because He said, I will be God to you. I will be your God.
Yeah.
So He has made Himself the reward. And, worshiping God, from once you have chosen to do that, because like my husband said, yes, God created us to worship Him, but He still gave us the power of choice.
Yes.
Okay? You have to, it entails a lot more things than, what we think. And at this point, maybe I should bring in some of the things I've written about life applications. Mm-hmm. Because we always like to talk about the life applications of the Bible study that we teach here. Because we are living in a real world that demands real issues from us. And so you keep talking about worship, okay? How I look at how it comes to me. Remember here we talk about worship, serving. Worship, serving. You see that the two actually mean the same thing, okay? Worship will tend to speak of who am I serving, whom do I serve with my life? Mm-hmm. That's what it speaks of. Who governs my life? And these were the two things that God said Abraham should do.
Yes.
Serve me faithfully and be blameless. And if you look at every other thing he did, after he talked to Abraham about this, he would give Abraham instructions, and Abraham would do it without questioning.
Yeah.
It means that God is the person, without asking. Even when he said, go and kill Isaac, go and sacrifice your son, he didn't say, why?
Yeah.
When he said, leave your land, he didn't say, why? When he said, do this, he didn't ask God. He began to live for God and started to serve God faithfully.
Yeah.
Okay? For you to be able to do this, you have to be able to be devoted to that being, and that is God. And you have to be able to reverence that being.
Yeah.
And your reverencing God is what will make you acknowledge him for who he is.
Yes.
You acknowledge him for who he is. And that who he is his greatness, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then it will now elicit something in you that will make you surrender. Therefore, worship becomes voluntary.
Yes.
You see, Nebuchadnezzar was telling the Jewish boys, you must bow down when you hear this.
Yes.
There was no attachment to their God. There was no acknowledging what their God is. And that's why he had to do it by coercion, by force.
Yeah.
But when you see God for who he is, when you acknowledge him for what he has done for us in your life and my life, and that thing he has done is giving us his son Jesus Christ to come and die for our sins. And through that Christ, we have all become the children of God. Okay? When you acknowledge all these things, then you will see that worship becomes easy to you. And a lot of times we think that worship is, we go to church. Oftentimes they ask, how was service today? The praise and worship was wonderful. To us, that's what worship is. To a lot of us, that's what worship is. To a lot of us, when we say, God, you are great, when we praise him with a lot of words, we say we are worshiping God. Fine. But it has to come from the heart first. Yeah. It's a spiritual matter that is in the heart. If not, then it's meaningless. Those are outward signs of worship, but there must be the inside. Yes. It comes from receiving God and knowing him for who he is, and allowing him to live, surrendering your life totally to him, which is what he asked Abraham for. Live before me, serve me faithfully. And those are, there's a lot of things, that even when we go to, there's a particular passage that I would have wanted us to look at here, and which is in Romans, where Paul was, Romans 12, where Paul was pleading with Christians or pleading with the church. Okay? Therefore, brethren, I beseech you, I think Romans 12:1, to present our bodies living sacrifice, which is the reasonable service to God, and which he will accept. That is worship. And when we do that, you say, in real life, okay, how are we just going to lay ourselves on the altar? How do we do that? It's by representing God. That thing God will want you to do, to be God to another man.
Yeah.
Do it. Not because of that person, but because we should love the way he wants us to love.
Yeah.
We should keep his commandments the way he wants us to keep his commandments. You can't say, I'm worshiping God, and then you see, you have, you are living in unforgiveness.
Yeah.
You see somebody that needs help you cannot give. Or you say, I'm worshiping God, and then you see, you'll be able to offer a little help for somebody to go to school, or, out of the abundance of what you have. You cannot share it. And you say, this person is devoted, I'm worshiping God, and just seek God, worship him, surrender your life, so that he will lead you in every area of your life.
Yes.
That is absolute, that is true worship. That's what it is.
Yeah. Okay. Then Just to summarize about choice of worship, that God does not want coercion. He does not. He did not create us. He did not try to force us to worship Him. He does not like people being forced to worship Him. He does not accept compelled worship. We find that coercion in worship is not of God. And that is one good lesson from what Nebuchadnezzar tried to do, or what he did, in fact, by creating an image and then forcing people, creating a punishment for people that don't worship the image. God does not want us to motivate worship in that way, because He gave everyone the right to choose to worship Him. Of course, He wants us to choose to worship Him, but He gives us the right to make that choice. So that any action that has the effect of compelling people to worship, to perform an act of worship, could have something in common with what Nebuchadnezzar did, even though what Nebuchadnezzar did is an extreme case. But if an act of worship is designed in a way that it has something in common, that is, it has an element of coercion in it, an element of trying to compel people one way or the other, with some kind of threat of punishment or threat of denial of one thing or the other, it could be likened to Nebuchadnezzar's attempt, and we know that God repudiated Nebuchadnezzar's attempt. The way He repudiated it was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown into the furnace, and He turned the furnace into something ineffective. They stayed there, they sang, and in fact an angel joined them. He was trying to use that to show that there is a reward for people that worship Him, and you cannot force people. It is wrong. It is not of God to try to force people to worship in any way. God wants people to choose, and the emphasis is on choose. Wants people to choose to worship Him.
In fact, if you remember in the Bible, somewhere in the Bible, He said, if we will not worship Him, and I mean that this is God, that He will raise, He's capable of raising the sun.
Yes, I've seen.
On the earth.
Yeah.
The sun.
Stones, yeah.
To raising stones and sun to worship Him.
Yes.
So He has no need to
force
us, because it's not He can cause other things like the stone He said to worship. But then we will be losing out in the reward that He promised.
Yes.
And God forbid that any stone will take my place
in
the service and worship of Jehovah.
Yes. So what we learned, coercion in worship does not please God. That is using force, intimidation, or any kind of threat or punishment, or any kind of threat to compel people to worship, does not please God, and it is not of God. And this applies to every act of worship. God expects us to choose to worship Him, but He expects it to be a personal decision. He gives every person the right to make that decision. And of course, He puts the reward very clear on the table. If you worship Him, He will be your God. If you choose to worship Him, then He will be your God. That is, you will be a child of God. Well, Christ put it back to us, and in this passage that we read from John, I put it up here so that we can look at it, but it emphasizes again the choice of worship. If you choose to worship God, He gives you the right to become a child of God. And that is the reward for worshiping Him. That is the reward for making that choice. Because in John there it says, as many as received him. So you make a decision to receive. It's a choice. Nobody will force you to do that. In fact, there isn't a way for anybody to force you to receive. It's not possible. It's a choice. Make that choice and he will be your God. But don't try to force people to perform an act of worship.
Of course, receiving him here does not just mean, oh, I agree that you are the Messiah, or I agree that you are the Savior.
Yes.
When you receive him, you surrender. Receiving him means surrendering that your life to him. Because once you surrender that life to him, okay, you revere him, and the involuntary response, the response that comes without you fighting it, is an act of worship.
Yes.
And then that elicits you to live for him. You begin to live your life for him. I often tell people, Christianity is not a religion, in quotes. It's life.
It's a life, It's a way of life.
It's life. You begin to live that life.
Yes.
And that is the true act of worship.
Yes.
That is why this particular verse is so important
Yes.
to our worship. If you don't receive Christ, you can't worship him.
Yeah.
You can't acknowledge his greatness. You can't acknowledge that which he has done. What God has done, you can't acknowledge it. It's not possible for you to do that. And all those things come naturally. So, but as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become the children of God.
Yes.
Because then he takes over, he becomes your God.
Yes.
Which is the reward that he promised us.
Yes. And that brings us to the end of this Bible study. And we thank all those that will make contact with this Bible study by going to our website, bankingblessing.org. And we pray that there you will go through this study and be able to benefit from it, learn something from it that will make a positive impact on your life, and most importantly, bring you closer to God's purpose for your life. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, and good night.